Question?
No, I think I got it covered.
Okay, thank you. Then your time begins now.
I don't know what the problem with Nancy Pelosi is. She recently came out and said she uses the Bible to guide her legislation. And there's nothing that says San Francisco values like the book of Genesis. So I don't see what the problem is. Now green jobs are working at John Deere. That's what green jobs are. It's not letting the government take over the energy sector, control your light bulbs, control your windows. The land of the free is where we're supposed to be living here, and these people want to control your toilets. They want to control the water pressure in your toilets. Stay out of my toilet, Gabrielle Giffords, all right? This is exactly why they're going to get a pink slip in November. This cap and trade myth, this global warming myth that the media panders to the left about has got to stop, and it's got to stop now. And we need a constitutional amendment that any bill named Carrie Lieberman is immediately shredded. It's a terrible idea. It's an absolutely terrible idea. We don't have to bow to them anymore. And this is, again, the problem. It's like the immigration problem and others that we've talked about. The problem is not that it's just on the left. It's that half the people that sign on to these things are on our side. That's the problem. We need to fight them. The battle lines are drawn in this nation between liberalism and conservatism, and we're right on the issues. Let's do battle. I'm Jesse Kelly, that's all.
You had plenty of time for that name ID. Thank you. Let me just remind everyone in the audience, see, you guys get a little older, you need these glasses, so I'm glad you're young up here. 4 minutes allotted for the response to this question. It's going to be asked by Mr. Parisi. This is the fiscal reform and responsibility question. We're going to start with Jonathan Payton, and thank you.
As Ray said, fiscal reform and responsibility. Last November, one of the most successful Republican election campaigns ever resulted in the upset victory by Chris Christie for governor of New Jersey. It was based on fiscal reform and responsibility. New Jersey's budget deficit is one of the highest in the country. On March 16th, the governor, Christie, presented a detailed budget plan to the New Jersey legislature. It was called Reduction and Reform. Now, each of you has been given the opportunity to check out that budget plan. Some of the highlights of the plan: in the first 8 weeks in office, he reduced the budgets in every single government agency from 4% to 25%. The state Senate has approved his plans to reform the union pension system, cap the growth of property taxes. He introduced a proposal for civil service reform, consolidate or eliminate hundreds of authorities, boards, and commissions, and establish a privatization advisory board for savings by contracting with competent outside firms for certain work performed by the state. The question: do you think that similar reduction and reform initiatives can be applied at the federal level? And if so, specifically, what would you propose?
I fully support what he's doing because at the legislature, that's what we've had to do to balance our budget. I voted for the largest spending cut in state history and the largest tax cut in state history. The only way that you can get this budget under control is to rein in the rampant spending, and the way to do that, to be honest with you, is to reduce taxes. Because if there isn't that revenue going in, they're not going to be spending it. And I guarantee you, I have never had a bureaucrat come back to me at my desk in the legislature and say, we got too much money last year, we want to give some of it back. That'll never happen. You know, I really like, everyone who knows me knows that I love to roast up these whole pigs. We have been doing it all over the district. We had over 250 people show up to Udall Park about a couple Saturdays ago. And the theme is, pork is for roasting, not for spending. And we had a guy that came in, and I think he probably ate like a whole pound of that roasted pork. And he said, at the end of it, he said, well, Jonathan, I love pork more than anybody. And I said, well, you've never seen Gabrielle Giffords' earmark requests, apparently. Because the truth of the matter is, the way we are going to stop this bloated deficit and the bloated budget that we have is to end the earmarks that we see in Washington, D.C. It's the only way to do it. I watched from the gallery in Congress. I looked down on the floor of Congress, and I saw people lining up as soon as John Murtha sat down when he was still alive. And they all lined up, and one at a time they bent down and asked him for favor after favor after favor. It looked like something out of watching The Godfather, where they're asking Don Corleone for something. That is an outrage in this country. And that is exactly what the problem is in Washington, D.C., because those pork barrel projects are not based on necessity. Those pork barrel projects are based on political necessity and loyalty to Nancy Pelosi. That's why we have such a rampant, out-of-control spending problem in Washington, D.C., because those individual earmarks obligate congressmen and women to vote for larger and larger budgets. The way to reduce spending is simply to do that. Eliminate earmarks. Start to address the entitlement problem in this country. We know that your children, your grandchildren will never see Social Security, even though they're paying into it. And we know that many of you are wondering if you're still going to see Social Security after you've been putting all that money in payroll taxes over the years. We have got to reform the system because it is unsustainable right now. The biggest question I get all the time from people is how are we going to deal with what's going on in Washington? I'll tell you this right now. Gabrielle Giffords asked for more earmarks than anyone else in the state of Arizona. She asked for so many earmarks that she even asked for earmarks in Raul Grijalva's district. And the reason he cited, Raul Grijalva said that Gabrielle Giffords gets so many earmarks because she is in a politically vulnerable district. Is that the way our system should be run? I believe that if you really wanted to actually get more money for Arizona, if that was your goal, if you eliminated the earmark system, we give more money to Washington, D.C. than we get back. That would actually be a fair system for Arizona. But unfortunately, we have a patronage system in Washington, D.C. That's why I pledge not to seek earmarks. That's why I'm not going to do anything that's going to bring pork barrel projects, because I believe that fundamentally it's clogging the arteries of the United States. Thank you.
Mr. Kelly, please. You've got 4 minutes. Thank you.
Governor Christie for president, as far as I'm concerned. That's a state that needed it and needed it bad. There's a clear direction going forward for this economy, and it's not a mystery. It doesn't take an economic genius. It just takes looking at history and what's worked. Tax cuts work. We need to get to a 10% flat tax in this country. Every American paying a small stake into their federal government. If 10% is good enough for Jesus, it's good enough for the federal government. They'll find a way to make do with it. And we constantly hear this lie that, well, I guess it's not a complete lie, that 10% wouldn't fund the government at its current levels. That's the idea. It doesn't need to be at its current levels. This government has grown so massively. We need to get the bureaucracy out of the economy, the EPA, Department of Education, all these different bureaucratic groups that lord power over the American people, that these unelected, unaccountable bureaucrats have any say-so in our economy. That's what's driving up the costs and lowering the standard of living. Why do we have an oil spill in the Gulf? Maybe it's because we have environmental regulations that force BP to drill in 5,000 feet of ocean water instead of right offshore. But don't worry, President Obama's on it. I'm very relieved. We have all this boom sitting there in Maine. It could be there tomorrow, yet they do nothing about it. I am proud to admit, by the way, on a little side note, kind of off subject, that a marine scientist, well actually he's a private civilian scientist that contracts with the Marine Corps, has a solution for the problem. We dropped what is called the mother of all bombs on it. It's the largest non-nuclear device. It blows it up and cauterizes it, for lack of a better word, and it makes me proud as a Marine to know that the Marine Corps solution is always just blow it up. So that works out well. But we need to get the Sierra Club out of our government. We need to start winning elections. It's the answer to everything we talk about here is winning elections. These tea parties, they activate people and they wake people up. We take this economy back by sending conservatives, someone with actual private sector experience who's managed budgets and know what that means to manage a budget, because if I don't manage mine, I'm not voted out of office, I'm fired. That's what we need in Washington right now.
Yeah, plenty of time, but thank you.
Well, where do we begin with how to transform the fiscal nature of our government spending? What is interesting about this election cycle, unlike anything that we've seen in at least a very, very long time, is normally the voters get restless once the taxes hit. This time around, it didn't take the taxes to hit. It was the obscene amount of spending that's coming out of the White House and his ilk like Pelosi and Reid and Giffords and all the usual suspects. So that's the good news, is people are awake just on the amount of spending.